Hello, Internet. My name is Chamomile.
Can get down.
What? Why? What's up?
We have to be careful. Emily Dickinson's assassins are about.
Okay, but we do still have to do a show. Like, I don't want to fall behind on the show again. We'll have to rebuild the buffer. We'll have to do 4 episodes per week. The fourth episode is always just, you can tell we're exhausted. It's never as good.
All right, just be careful. We must have angered her by stealing Death's carriage.
Yeah, isn't she like a shut-in? Like a pre-internet recluse?
Yeah.
How did she hire assassins?
Well, what she does is she writes little notes and puts them in a basket and lowers it over her guarded wall for the children to read, and then the children go to the assassins.
And people are just okay with, the children pick these notes up and read them, and then later that same day, they're like headed to the local Assassins Guild.
Yep.
I didn't even know Massachusetts had an Assassins Guild.
I mean, doesn't everybody everywhere have an Assassin's Guild? Does Utah not have an Assassin's Guild?
I mean, we
That is
don't,
sad.
but I guess that might be like how we don't have casinos. That's right, I am in a brand new place and have no idea where I am. Let's just explore randomly. But yeah, we are after an exhumed Archbishop today.
Huh. Is this going to be like the Cadaver Synod?
I'm actually not familiar with that. So, maybe?
A pope, a newly crowned pope, dug up his predecessor and put him on trial.
Oh, I do remember this story.
Yes.
Oh, hey, look, it's the protagonist of the other game.
Ah.
I guess it's very important that she has rose tattoos.
On her upper thighs.
Faceless warrior, stay thy course.
Never played this other game, so
I sense a heavy burden within
I have
thee,
no idea who this
although
person
I
is.
can neither see thy face nor hear thy voice. Forgive my manners. My name is Miriam. This place of
Oh, so she gets a voice
has summoned
actor.
me. Something in this suffering land. A will that awaits
I mean, she is a spiritual successor to Castlevania protagonists, who,
and brought me to
Alucard,
this
at
place.
very least, in Symphony of the Night,
If it is
had a voice, so
sent to this
that makes
meeting,
sense.
It must be because we are being put to the test, destined to mutually help one another under its watchful gaze. This crystal that lies before us is what allows me to travel to distant lands. But, as you can see, it is cracked, and its magic extinguished. To restore it,
Yeah, I think I saw one of
must
these.
find the shards that are scattered throughout your world.
Well, you get right on that. You are, after all, a protagonist.
One of them. It lies beyond this door. This is one of the portals of the Blue Rose that guard each and every one of the crystal shards. The force of its magic will not allow me to enter. Pray, help me, anonymous warrior.
So are you going to go complete one of my side quests while I do this?
Retrieve the shards. I must return to my kingdom, and I must not tarry.
Never done this before, so, never played the other game either, so I have no idea how much of this is
I mean, so
references
far it
to
seems
that
pretty
other game.
similar. So far it seems pretty similar to Blasphemous.
Yeah. Not exactly tricky either, but I'm nervous because, this is in the second half of the game. This is all very straightforward, and it's making me super nervous.
Just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, like, it can't be this easy, right? Oh shit, there's a timer. That's what it is. Well, I'm not sure how much effort I'm going to put into this, but I will at least give it one more go now that I've noticed I'm on the clock. I do dislike time challenges.
Well, and you got less than a minute. Not high hopes.
I also have no idea how far away the end is. Alright, platform, hurry it up. We're on the clock here.
You're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it turns out the other shoe was the inevitability of time.
So it was. Ah, that was close, but hey, I made it. Probably not going to bother with any more of these.
Look, the portal of the Blue Rose has closed. The shard has returned, and the crystal is reforming.
You're welcome.
I beg thee, help me retrieve the remaining shards.
I still want to know what you're doing here. I feel like if you introduce the protagonist of another game, they should be accomplishing something. Like, this ain't some loser NPC.
So what I'm getting of this is, like, you're going to be really weird about it when Mario shows up, aren't you?
I mean, only if he's going to be a lazy little shit about it. Like, if he wants to go Goomba stomp some weird pillar-armed pilgrims for me, then, If, like, I get to the end of the game and it's time to kill the Pope, and Mario shows up and jumps on an axe and dumps him in lava, then, like, okay, fantastic.
On the topic of Mario, they're doing a Sonic sequel.
How?
Presumably the same way they did it the first time.
That implies the movie made money, though.
I think it did.
Okay, so I
it was pretty successful. How? I guess the 90s are back.
I mean, it is, like, the right era for it, but the movie itself, just 80s nostalgia is finally starting to wear away. Stranger Things has peaked and such. And so you would expect 90s nostalgia to start coming in. And, I mean, that if you look around to a bunch of stuff that's been really popular lately, although the 90s aesthetic, like, the nostalgia for that started, like, 7 years after the 90s ended, and so now everyone is sick of it. But a lot of actual 90s properties are very popular right now. Final Fantasy VII, for example, got a remake, and it was a huge deal and everyone loved it. Of course, the Final Fantasy VII remake was good, so... And that's another thing. Like, Stranger Things, sure, it was a love letter to Steven Spielberg movies from the 80s, but it was also, good at that. I gotta get used to it.
You get some of these period TV shows, and you can barely tell that they're set in a period. Like, the Goldbergs, you can barely tell is set in the 80s. Fresh Off the Boat is even worse. You can barely tell it's set in the 90s. I guess like it's worse for the Goldbergs. The Goldbergs, like the 80s is another decade. Like, at least the 90s is closer.
You okay,
I know
buddy?
Miss Marvel was set partially in the 90s, but I did not see it, so I don't know how relevant the 90s is to that movie.
Captain Marvel, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, nah, I caught that one. There's a couple of moments where they kind of beat you over the head with how the 90s it is. But, it doesn't actually make a difference. It could have been like the year before Infinity War and it would have made no difference. Like when she crash lands on Earth, she lands in a blockbuster. But... pardon me. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to die now. So yeah, that guy over there apparently started the trend of this whole rope bondage pilgrimage thing. Okay, you know what? I will come back later. That guy is at some point supposed to die, and then I can loot his corpse. Apparently that guy there feels real guilty about something, hence his pilgrimage. Oh god, I remember this.
What is it?
That giant bell thing. Took me completely off guard first time I came to this room.
Does it do anything?
If you're not crouching, it will kill you.
Ah.
Like it did to those guys. It's just a ludicrous sensor. In the full of incense sense, not in the... Alright, you bastard. Follow me. Ah, he ducked it. Fine. This game certainly seems to have something to say about Catholic guilt, but I'm not sure what.
It's just somebody entering in the room and going, Catholic guilt, and then leaving. So, since Wizards of the Coast is coming out with a Ravenloft themed source book, do we want to talk about horror in D&D and whether it's plausible or not? We can also talk a little bit about Carrion Crown from Pathfinder and Strange Aeons. Can you do horror in a D&D setting?
Yeah. Can we also talk about how this is clearly Wizards attempting to steal the thunder from my phenomenally successful, internationally renowned Undead sourcebook that I kickstarted I was like halfway through the Kickstarter. They came out with the they announced Ravenloft. But horror in D&D. Can you do it? If and only if you have a group of people who are willing to play along. I keep using that potion before I mean to. Gotta fix my twitchy fingers. But yes, if your players are all making Monty Python jokes, nothing will be funny. It's actually very difficult to scare someone when they aren't isolated. It's one reason why haunted houses tend to rely a lot on jump scares. That's one of the only things that doesn't get less startling, even if you're in a group of all your friends.
In general, RPG characters have way too much power and agency for horror to really work.
That certainly doesn't help.
Like, even in horror where the heroes win, a lot of times it's like, just at the last second, there's a lot of losses leading up to it. Like, they defeat Freddy at the end of Friday Night, not Friday Night Lights. After Freddy kills the football team, no.
I never saw that movie. I did not realize Freddy Krueger was in it.
Yeah, it's part of the Nightmare on Elm Street extended universe. A lot of people don't realize it. It happens in the background, but at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street, she kills Freddy, but like all her friends are dead. Like, took a while for her to get that agency, and like the amount of agency player characters have, and also that players expect, is a lot greater than what most horror protagonists have.
Yeah. So the rule of 3 is my waifu. I love to structure things in a setup, build up, climax arc. Did I end up? Oh yeah, I did end up on the ground floor. Okay. And for a horror game, your setup is going to establish your monster, and then your build-up is going to be entirely about survival against something that you cannot fight, that is just massively more powerful than you. And, not only that, but something which will indeed kill several of you. Like, not literally every horror movie follows this trend, of course, but generally speaking, in the first act, you set up your characters. In the second act, you kill at least half of them. That sense of being picked off one by one is really good for horror. But it's also, how do you... you can't do that with NPCs, because you've too obviously labeled them as the ones who will die. So you've got to do something to even get started. You've got to do something weird, where you've got to have something for people to do after they've been eliminated. An easy solution to this is dead characters join the monster somehow. Okay, I've got to find a pretty... I'm about to die. But yeah, if the monster can somehow, like if it's a zombie plague, which is not very scary anymore, so you shouldn't do that, but just as an example, if dead characters can come back as zombies and still be playing, but now from the enemy's side, then, that can work.
So like what, Betrayal at the House on the Hill does.
Yeah, although Betrayal usually only has one character become the traitor. For an RPG, you'd want to have characters, especially you wouldn't want characters to be revealed to have been the monster all along, like in Betrayal, because you're role playing. You don't want that suddenly thrown into the story when this happens in Betrayal sometimes, and you just roll with it because it's a board game. But it's like, oh, I have thoroughly screwed myself because I did not realize I was a vampire until just now. Like, I remember there was one time I played that game, and I can't remember exactly who the monster was, but he had I think it was a book, where if you toss the book in the furnace, it destroys him. And so, the traitor was revealed, but we already had the book, and the furnace was just down the hall. So, we handed the book off to a high-speed character. That guy ran down the hall and tossed in the furnace. Poor bastard died before he even got a turn as the traitor.
Aww.
And, had he known he was the traitor and what kind of traitor he was all along, you would expect he might have been more careful about keeping that book further away from the furnace.
Yep.
So yeah, you don't want that kind of thing to be possible in your RPG. You want to have everyone know what their characters know, as soon as their characters know it.
And based on that, it doesn't seem like you can really do horror in D&D specifically. Like, you can have a horror aesthetic, but I think like the amount of agency and power characters expected in D&D is too great.
It would be firmly in the category, you know, if you did that, it would be firmly in the category of using D&D for things D&D is bad at. Oh, that didn't go anywhere interesting. Guess I probably should have realized, you know, if I'd opened my map, what was below it, but oh well. Oh yeah, that's right. This is where Cleophas comes to hang out and does his whole to be or not to be speech. And if you have eaten all your vegetables, you can convince him not to jump. You may or may not be able to do that. You know, well, depends on whether or not I'm able to do that side quest properly. I'm trying to get the good endings here. I'm trying to help people. It works out like half the time. There's that one pilgrim, you know, I keep helping him out, but it never actually does anything. I mean, it does do things, it does advance his plot, but the one guy who's bent over all the time, like, yeah. No matter what you do, he always ends up in despair. So that's kind of annoying.
Do you think it's acceptable to do horror aesthetic in a...
Absolutely. I am 100% down for a Castlevania thing where the main villain is Dracula and his castle is just full of, you know, assorted horror monsters. It's got a bunch of werewolves and witches and, you know, some kind of horror-themed fodder minion. Never mind what kind exactly.
So basically, Curse of Strahd.
Essentially, yeah. Curse of Strahd is a really popular adventure path. People love that aesthetic. It's funny, it's one of the only adventure paths I haven't run because everyone has already played it.
Ah.
Okay, I remember you being super annoying, but I can't remember why.
Now, have you read through Carrion Crown?
Yes, and Strange Aeons, but it has been a while for both. So...
You remember any thoughts on either of them?
Not any specific thoughts, except that, I mean... I dimly recall that in, like, the introductions and stuff, they really tried to play up the horror aspect, which, you know, of course, inevitably did not work at all, because Pathfinder is a fairly straight D&D knockoff, and you can't do horror when you're killing the monster at the end of every single chapter. Does this lead anywhere? Nah, I guess there's an option to let me skip that fight. Aha, that's right. You're annoying when you have a dog.
I thought the idea of structuring it each chapter by a monster type was cute, so it can get repetitive. Like, you also run into the fact that they can get really Pathfinder can be very core race only Final Destination. You really do not want the PCs to end up as werewolves or vampires, which you're doing your horror adventures when you want to release a supplement that allows them to do that.
Right.
But, you know...
In one of my Kickstarter updates, I actually had a little gag about how Wizards of the Coast, you know, had their chance to release playable Dampier when they released Curse of Strahd, and they didn't. So, you know, now I was doing mine, and then, like, the day before the Kickstarter launches, they go and they release a playable Dampier.
Also,
Yeah,
the ultimate villain is Tarpathon, who is the most uninteresting lich that I've ever encountered.
I mean, that would explain why I can't remember a single goddamn thing about him.
Well, he follows the philosophy of the Whispering Way. And what do you think the philosophy of the Whispering Way wants, Chamomile? What is their goal for the world?
I can't remember if I'm actually remembering this or if it's just my best guess based on standard Paizo stupidity. I mean, from the way you're phrasing that, this is obviously not merely a merely unexceptional philosophy. It's got to be stupid somehow. So I'm going to guess that it is somehow related to atheism being evil.
That would at least be a philosophy.
Ah.
The Whispering Way is the process of becoming a lich, which the process of becoming a lich is not a philosophy. It is not a motivating idea. Nobody at Paizo understands what the word philosophy means.
Yeah, no, I have no comment. This, by the way, is the elevator we need to get upstairs to where the Pope is hanging out so we can kill him. We need 3 masks for this. Guarded by 3 bosses. Ah, yeah, and here's Estras's buddies. These have the dubious honor of being some of the only enemies that I tend to just run right past when given the opportunity. Mainly just because of how much health they have. But yeah, so horror in D&D. Basically doable only if you are using D&D as, you know, a template for making a completely different RPG, at which point you really should just be making a completely different RPG. Like, you know, if you're making a cyberpunk RPG, you do not need to ask yourself, okay, what are my races?
Now, Strange Aeons,
Strange Aeons was Paizo making a Lovecraft-themed adventure path. So I cannot wait to hear your opinion on this one.
It's impressive how they made it boring.
I mean, that's fair. One thing you can say about Lovecraft, for all of his other faults, he was never dull. I am absolutely going to die here. Again, this is one of those APs that I can remember almost nothing about, which is about half of them. And, I mean, in fairness, there's like 20 APs. Some of them would have slipped through the cracks in my memory no matter what Paizo did. But, so it does not speak well, because the pitch for almost every single Paizo AP is really good. But the execution is so by the numbers, so similar to every other Pathfinder AP.
So there's a couple issues with Strange Aeons. First of all, there's a lot of, like, I guess what you would call fanon that is built up around Lovecraft that is not actually in the text. A lot of this comes out of the Call of Cthulhu RPG by Chaosium, where it's stuff that they made up for their game that is not actually in the text. So I would say you ignore it. but a lot of people regard it kind of like as if it was canon, even like it's not even like an interpretation of Lovecraft. It's something they made up for their RPG. You also get the issue that they have the main bad guy be Hastor, which is kind of weirdly off theme because Hastor is not actually like, he gets mentioned a couple times in Lovecraft, and Lovecraft makes him the King in Yellow, but then the actual King in Yellow short story cycle is not written by Lovecraft and is written by before Lovecraft. It's one of his influences, but the King in Yellow is kind of like relatively different from like a Cthulhu.
Yeah, it's a weird choice for your one and only main villain for your one and only Lovecraft themed campaign.
And they also made it really boring. Like, they didn't make him interesting at all. Which you can do something really interesting with the King in Yellow. The whole thing with, like, you know, an evil book, play that has this effect on people.
Yeah, it's an info hazard. SCP's
Yeah.
got a million of them.
But you would want to center like a portion of your campaign around that, which it doesn't.
Yeah, one of the fun things about the King in Yellow is like, okay, this play is now loose like a viral agent amongst the population of a certain city. Now what are you going to do about that?
Like, there's a whole thing to do with like mass, since we don't get a lot of excerpts from the King in Yellow in any of the original short stories. There's the one where the princess asks the stranger to unmask, and he says, "I wear no mask." But nothing really gets done with that. It's kind of just a pretty generic tour of Lovecraftian stuff.
Yeah, I mean, he's got
then
the
you get to the
Lovecraftian
thing.
bestiary in there. Like, I recall enough of it to know, like, there's a Shoggoth in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But, like, I can't
get the thing.
remember anything about it, which just, speaks really poorly to... So, in fact, I mean, Lovecraft is another thing where a major thing about Lovecraft was who his protagonists were. Like... it's not really a Lovecraft story. I mean, okay, Lovecraft wrote a lot of different stories, right? So we get into this weird thing where we use his name as the genre, but a lot of the things that he wrote, with his name, like you do, whereas not, didn't fit this. But your standard Lovecraft investigator story, part of it is that the investigator is just some random guy. Part of what makes it's scary is that it's an ambush, and it could happen to you, too.
That was the other thing in Strange Aeons is that there are monsters that Lovecraft uses and monsters that D&D uses that have been each is interpreted relatively differently. The obvious example being the ghoul, which in D&D has been undead, but which in Lovecraft is a sort of like subspecies of humanity that is cannibalistic and dog-like, which are kind of hard to reconcile, but they try to blend them together in Strange Aeons, which is weird. Since like not only are they ghouls and Lovecraft a subspecies of humanity, they're explicitly a subspecies of humanity who can start out looking like relatively normal people, which kind of seems weird for an undead. Like, you can be born a little undead baby and then just grow up normal, and then suddenly you look like it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Then you get the fact, and I will argue this point. So Pathfinder specifically was bad about this. They really wanted all undead to always be evil, which is dumb on its own. But when you bring in Lovecraft ghouls, are not always evil. They don't come out looking great in Pickman's model, but then in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadeth, they're perfectly helpful. They don't seem particularly evil. Like, they're not always evil, and it's not a whole. And part of Lovecraft is that, like, the Lovecraftian gods are not good or evil. They're aliens. They have different moralities than us. They are like us, as we are to ants. Like, we do stuff that, like, if an ant had any sort of comprehension, would seem unspeakably evil, but we're not doing it because we're evil. We're doing it because we don't comprehend ants as being, like, sapient creatures.
Right.
Like, alignment is dumb, period, but trying to force it onto Lovecraft is especially dumb.
Yeah, I mean, there's a problem with saying that, something is beyond good and evil, which is that good and evil are moral judgments that humans make. Nah, you're not beyond good and evil. I'm judging you right now. But it is still definitely true that one of the major, one of the major things, one of the major aspects of Lovecraft, and it kills me that people are apparently so genuinely unable to wrap their heads around this, that they actually do recoil from the horror and put it from their minds. But yeah, the assorted supernatural nasties in Lovecraft, by and large, do not care about humans. They sometimes kill humans, like, incidentally, because they're doing other things, and those things are, fatal to humans, right? An anthill gets paved over because we're building a house. And, yeah, it doesn't even occur to us as humans to care that the ants have been slaughtered. I don't know how I get out of there, but I need to get into there to get my guild fragment back. We'll see if I can figure it out.
And you get into, with Lovecraft, is the thing is, like, he was writing in the 1920s, and he was racist by the standards of the 1920s.
Right.
So his idea of what is evil not really link up with our ideas with what is evil. Like, the Shoggoths are, like, essentially a slave race. Reading them now, they're pretty sympathetic. They overthrow their masters, but to Lovecraft, like, a lesser being overthrowing its superiors is innately horrific. There was an article I was reading, I don't remember the name of the article, but the author pointed out that, like, pretty much whenever Cthulhu gets invoked in Lovecraft's work, he's invoked by someone who is either, like, an oppressed minority, an outcast, or an artist, which kind of makes Cthulhu seem not really evil. Like, there's stuff like the one line that I will pull up really quick in Call of Cthulhu. Then the liberated old ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would aflame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom. Now, D&D alignment is dumb, but if you're going to give that being an alignment, it's not chaotic evil, it's chaotic neutral.
Right.
Cthulhu is the god of liberation.
Hang on, do I need to... Yeah, that's it. I just need to go down through here. Okay.
He is the god of humanity unfeathered by the boundaries of civilization, which I think is a much more interesting interpretation of Cthulhu than he's just this generic evil dude.
I'd vote for him.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not saying you have to make Cthulhu good in your campaign, but like, it's something to think about. Again, the solution here is to just get rid of alignment because alignment is dumb.
It is. Like, ultimately, people rather famously do not agree on what good and evil is. So, you know. The Paladin in particular, and later editions have been better about this. But still, you know, the Paladin in particular, which required the GM to judge their actions as either good or evil, is just absolutely asinine. It's I'm getting mobbed. But yeah, I mean, one thing that the Paladin Falls thing has led to is basically there are GMs out there who have adopted the basically the philosophy, at least within their games, that in order to be evil, you have to like wake up and twirl your sinister mustache and say, I am going to do some evil things today. Which is not a very good perspective on evil. Like, it's super weird that there is a cosmic order that says you can kill as many babies as you want, and that's fine, just as long as you don't intend, like, specifically intend to do harm. But I see why it got there, right? It was like, basically, you want to set the bar for being evil super high so that you don't get... So, you know, you don't end up being that GM who causes the Paladin to fall.
Just briefly returning to the
Yeah, I'm missing something.
topic of Lovecraft and of H.P. Lovecraft kind of being... H.P. Lovecraft was like a bad guy by the standards of the 1920s. How does The Shadow over Innsmouth open?
How does it open?
Yes, what is the opening of The Shadow over Innsmouth? What gets talked about?
Oh god, I can't remember.
This is going to be like the Tarzan episode where I want to emphasize it's not an extrapolation on my part. This is in the text. The people of Innsmouth get sent to concentration camps. And the word concentration camp, that is the very beginning.
Oh.
The phrase concentration camp is used specifically. And he also specifically mentions... it doesn't name drop the ACLU, but it's implied the ACLU sues on the Deep One's behalf, but then when they're shown how awful the Deep Ones are, they withdraw their complaint. Like, this is the opening couple of paragraphs of The Shadow over Innsmouth. Like, the Deep Ones are an oppressed minority. Like, that's not even a weird extrapolation that I am making.
Yeah, no, that's just...
That is in the text.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even need to give a page number. Just open the short story and read the first part.
Yeah, depending on exactly what edition you're reading, the page may or may not be one. You know, there could be a preface or something that may be... It's typically going to be numbered separately from the pages of the proper, but... Uh-oh. But yeah, I mean, there's fertile ground for Lovecraft, you know, but the monsters are the good guys, at least some of them. You know, you could just go full on and say, yeah, all the monsters are the good guys. Any of the ones who seem genuinely evil from Lovecraft's writing were simply misrepresented. And since, Lovecraft is clearly a terrible person, that is fair. It's funny, I fairly regularly, find myself having conversations about how, like, oh, author XYZ, is not as racist as the clickbait articles have been making them out to be. It's a reliable source of clicks is to say that, oh, hey, this beloved person was secretly racist, which is, usually exaggerated and sometimes even fabricated. Even Robert E. Howard, who has tons of race essentialism in his works, and, you should not read them if you're not ready for those yikes moments, but even he is not as racist as the average clickbait article would make him out to be. Lovecraft, however, he just is a clickbait article ready to go. No exaggeration was necessary.
Yeah. There's the poem. The Medusa's coil is the smoking gun for that.
Oh yeah, that one is like
that is his mask off moment.
I mean,
Horror Red Hook is not great either, and the rats in the walls. Boy, is he fond of that word. You know the one.
Right. The street is also, it's targeted against, like, Portuguese and Russians, which gets into how, like, Lovecraft is a racist by the standards of 1925. Is that, he's still angry about the Irish. So yeah, like, even though it's all various, insufficiently waspy white races, the street is still pretty mask off about it.
That was close.
Yeah. Alright, I think I got it. Nope, that thing swings higher than I thought it did. You bastard! That thing swings very high. But yes, the street is entirely a polemic about racial purity and stuff. Like, that's just what it is from beginning to end. There's not even a particularly, Lovecraftian type. There's a sort of a magical realism to it, in that at some point the street itself takes revenge on the impure races that have come to inhabit it. But,
that is...
And it's, again, that, those races are all like Portuguese and Russians. It's... Lovecraft had a very narrow range of people he was okay with.
Yeah.
Like, he has a... I forget the story. The one where the guy's a star. A star trapped in the body of a West Virginian, which is like a fate worse than death for it. He is this gleaming, luminous creature trapped in this inferior Appalachian.
He is very concerned about racial degeneration. That comes out a lot in Lovecraft.
He is absolutely terrified of it. Like, about the only redeeming quality you can say Lovecraft has on the subject is that he does there does seem to be an understanding in him that, like, white purity is a myth. But, like, this provokes no end of horror in him. Like, the realization that every bloodline is tainted, quote-unquote, is just, like, the scariest thing in the world to him. Which, come to think of it, reminds me of, I forget the name of the story. The story of the machine where you turn it on and you can see all of the jellyfish people who have been, you know, there all along in the other dimension, but you couldn't see them until you turned on this machine.
I remember which one you're talking about, but I don't remember the name either.
Which is not particularly racist unto itself, for once. But there is a... it has this same thing as with the, the tainted bloodline issue, where it's just like, wait, so if this has been going on for, like, forever, then it's not actually a problem, is it? Right? Like, this has always been the case. Clearly we're doing fine. You get that in creepypasta sometimes. You know, they'll have a great horror, which is something that has secretly always been there. But then it's kind of like, oh, well, if it's always been there, then there's no particular need for concern, is there? Like, I've been dealing with this my whole life and never even noticed. So, it's always that very last bit that gets me. Also, while we're on the subject, Cthulhu is vulnerable to steamboats.
He takes aggravated damage.
It's just one of those things that, you know, have become really popular in the fan creators that is simply not present in the original, is the idea of Cthulhu as this invincible monster. Like,
And going back to the...
Not only is he vinced, it doesn't even take an especially large amount of firepower to do it. Like, an actual military would have had no trouble at all. A couple of rando merchants were able to do it with, you know, merchant sailors were able to do it with just, like, whatever was at hand.
Which, back on the topic of D&D, like, it is totally fine then for you to have your adventures stabbing Lovecraftian monsters in the face with their swords. Like, that's...
Yeah, no, a Shoggoth is like a CR6 creature.
That's not as off-theme as people will claim. Like...
Right. And it gets back into the idea of the ambush, is that, you know, a major element of Lovecraft stories is that the people dealing with these monsters are not prepared to deal with them. And about half the time, it's funny, people interpret success coming much less often than it does. You get this both in, you know, people's estimation of the success rate of protagonists in Lovecraft stories. They win about half the time. But also, it does also actually apply to how often they succeed in the game. People who are winning about half the time, which is, you know, if we assume that the monsters are playing by the same rules as them, then that means that they are evenly balanced with the monsters, and it could go either way. But they will refer to this as a death spiral. They will be convinced that they are... losing ground constantly. It's just something you have to keep in mind as a designer. But yeah, people think of Lovecraft as writing books where the horror always wins, but the mythos only wins about half the time. So, these again, rando protagonists who have no idea what they're doing and are in no way prepared to be fighting the mythos are nevertheless, they manage it about 50% of the time. So, like D&D heroes who are awash in spells and magic items and who can tank a ballista bolt to the face no problem. They should have... Not only should they be able to fight Lovecraftian creatures, it shouldn't even be especially hard for them. Like, a Lovecraftian creature does not automatically have to be a high-level encounter. Indeed, very few of them are. Cthulhu himself might be, just in that, in a medieval context, ramming something with a steamboat is actually about as powerful as you can get, Those guys don't have artillery shells. But,
Now, the spell, on the other hand, is clearly a CR20 encounter.
The what?
The bell.
It is a tricky one for sure. That's right, I can't hang out here forever. Platform disappears. Right. Wait for that to sail by. There. I just have to strategically get myself hit by the sensor at exactly the right time. Smoking heart of incense. What does that do? I don't even particularly want that. That's a disappointment. Oh, I don't have the thing equipped. Oh well. Relics in this game. You can only have... So the relics are, your Metroidvania-style power-ups. They unlock new ways of getting to new places, right?
Yeah.
You can only have 3 of them equipped at a time for no goddamn reason. They are passive effects. They don't share, context clues with each other. There's no puzzle that you have to solve where it is some kind of problem that you can only have 3 of them at a time. It's basically just if you forget to shuffle your relics around, then a pit that should be unlocked for you will instead be fatal, just like it was at the beginning of the game. If I forget whether or not I have the Silver Lung of Delphos equipped, then I might accidentally wander into some smoke and take some poison damage from it before, popping into my menu and equipping it to make myself immune so that I can explore the place. It's just, there's no reason why you should have to only have a limited number of relics. Yeah. Bottom line, if you want to do Lovecraft in D&D, then it is perfectly acceptable to have it as a mid-level adventure. Your player characters are probably not going to go mad with the revelation, because all the terrible revelations that Lovecraft was so concerned about were largely a result of his own neuroses, especially concerning race. And indeed, you know, a lot of the things that drive people mad in the imagination of the Lovecraft fandom are not things that drive people mad even in the original Lovecraft. They are distressing, but it's actually quite rare for someone to end up in an insane asylum due to, rarely does someone actually go mad from the revelation, even if they do often regret having learned about it. I think I want to be over there. But, so yeah, the madness does not have to feature, like, the insanity score. It's one of the things Call of Cthulhu introduced. The insanity score is not particularly good for getting Lovecraftian stories. Like, that is not a major concern in any of Lovecraft's stories. Characters are very rarely incapacitated by insanity. They find the things they learn about the universe to be distressing, but then they just go back to their job and it's fine. There are like 2 stories in Lovecraft where a character actually goes insane. There are several stories where a character is mistaken for insane because of the perfectly true things that they report, which are mistaken for delusions. But yeah, and also consider making the Mythos monsters the good guys, because a lot of them are actually quite sympathetic to anyone who isn't H.P. Lovecraft.
Yeah. Playable deep ones, please. Also...
And a deep one is just a Koatoa anyway.
Yeah, that was what I was really just about to say, was there's like 4 versions of that in D&D already. Like, Pathfinder's got like the Kuatoa, they've got... they've got Sahagin, they've got they added deep ones at some point, and they've also got Scum, so they've got 4 versions literally in Pathfinder. You need one
of Tritons and Mermaids, who, like, Sahagin and Tritons and Mermaids are all noticeably distinct from deep ones. Triton or Sahagin are specifically shark people, and Tritons are less fish, more people. But any of them can serve the narrative role of the deep ones, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, in order to serve the narrative role of a deep one, you basically just have to live underwater.